Now, it's interesting because there's another professor who I don't believe is tenured, Shai Davidai. He's an associate professor at Columbia of business, and he's had over 50 complaints of harassment filed against him by various students. But he's also been harassing faculty, and no one really cared at Columbia about his harassment of students who are more vulnerable than faculty. But they finally got upset because he went after some administrators.
Holloway thinks that if he pushes Shai away, his problems are over. Cass, this message is for you. I'm not going anywhere. And you can go yourself until we meet at court.
And he's been temporarily banned from campus, but not suspended indefinitely, and not fired, and not banned from teaching via Zoom, just not allowed onto campus. But you are a tenured professor, and you get fired over basically a post that some people find unsavory. So how do you explain this discrepancy? And I should say, sorry, I didn't say this because I forget that not everyone knows who Shai Davidai is, but he's extremely Zionist and calls like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace pro-terrorist organizations, and that because Columbia lets them, or used to, because I think they're both banned, but Columbia having let them on campus meant that he could not keep your children safe. Jewish parents out there.
To every parent who sends their kids to Columbia, I want you to know one thing. We cannot protect your child. I'm not saying this as a professor. I'm speaking to you as a dad. We cannot protect your children from pro-terror student organization because the president of Columbia University, of Harvard University, of Stanford, of Berkeley will not speak out against pro-terror student organizations.
And I'm not even sure he's banned. I think he's banned from the main campus, but not the business school. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But, I think it's really important to draw attention to the fact that not only has he been actively harassing in ways that make them unsafe Palestinian students at Columbia.
Right. Yeah. It's important to point out. Yes.
Yeah. And he wasn't, sanctioned in any way until staff complained.
Right.
And I think what that draws attention to is that there's two conversations that are going on in higher ed in the US and across the country in general. One is a sort of panic over student safety. And by student safety, this is constantly a conversation about Jewish student safety. And when we say Jewish student safety, we're actually talking about Zionist student safety. And that somehow has been given so much weight that the feelings of some students is seen as more important and more at risk than the fact that, according to the Lancet, at least 400,000 Palestinians have been brutally murdered in Gaza by the Israeli army. And so when we're talking about safety, feeling uncomfortable because your political ideology is being revealed to be the racist ideology that it is versus actual physical violence is not the same. But when we're talking about student safety in the US, we're not talking about the fact that Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and anti-Zionist students are actively being attacked, threatened, doxxed, harassed. And Davidai is one of those people who is guilty of actually creating unsafe situations for students, but because they are not Zionist students, we're not talking about their safety.
The only Jewish safety that's important is Zionist Jewish safety. So if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, you can get thrown to the ground. That literally happened to a professor in her 50s or 60s, I believe, at University of Vermont, who was I think in the Department of Jewish Studies at one point, and she was thrown on the ground by police. And several Jewish students have been also arrested, kicked out, physically attacked, as have all of these protesters. But it's just ironic because, according to the people who claim to care about Jewish safety, what they mean is a certain type of Jewish safety.
Yeah, I think that was Annalise Orlick at Dartmouth. And they're in addition to that danger and violence, we're also talking about, I mean, students at Columbia who were sprayed with,
Oh
skunk
yeah.
spray, and the administration refusing to acknowledge that they are still suffering health consequences from
Right.
that attack. And so, when Columbia University calls the NYPD to attack their own students, and we're seeing this across the country, but Columbia is one of the more dramatic stories. What do we mean when we talk about student safety?
Right. We've had Layla on, who was one of the people who was sprayed by this skunk water. And she's also been harassed, and she's had family members, killed in
Yeah.
Palestine. Then she has to deal with this, and someone like Shai Davidai, calling her a terrorist, as if it's not enough to like deal with the actual, physical violence that's happening in Palestine to her family. And so I'm just curious though, how is it that they were allowed to fire you? Because what kind of protection does tenure provide you with, and what were they able to do to overcome that?
This is sort of a longer, or this is part of a longer conversation in the US about whether, tenure has a future. And, Texas is, trying to push back on tenure policies, and this idea of, any kind of built-in institutional support for faculty is being eroded. And I think, tenure is a complicated thing because the point of tenure is to create a situation in which what happened to me can't happen, where, the sort of work that we're doing, if it is sort of political or ideologically, controversial in accordance with the way that power operates on the level of the institution, that the college president can't be like, well, I'm a Zionist, I don't like your work, and so you're fired. Tenure is actually supposed to create a situation in which that can't happen. Which is also really interesting because if you look at colleges and universities across the country, those kinds of protections are actually keeping, mostly men, but not entirely men, mostly white men, but not entirely white men who have, been, proven to harass, assault students. They keep their jobs because of the world that we live in. Tenure protects them from that. But in my case, speaking out in support of Palestinian liberation and calling a genocide is seen as so, devastating that it would cost me my job. But I think we're going to see this more and more. I think the equal opportunity non-discrimination policy is going to be a tenure loophole, because we even see this at schools like NYU and now UCLA, in which, being written into this policy is Zionist as a protected class, equating Zionist with Jewish in ways that sort of lift the protocols of faculty according to handbooks or statutes or whatnot out of the usual policies and sort of put it in the Title IX, Title VI bucket, in which things are happening that are really unclear. I mean, most of the time in which I was under investigation, I really didn't understand how the policy worked. I didn't understand where I was with the process. It's very opaque. And so my case in particular is with an appeals committee right now. And I think it'll be really important to see what ends up happening now that the elected faculty committee is reviewing my case. But the way that silence and confidentiality sort of sealed the proceedings with me made it so that not only did I have great lawyers, but not only did I not really understand what was going on, but it was so sealed off from the campus community that I couldn't have faculty on my campus advocating for me because they didn't understand what was happening. This is going to be a really precedent-setting case.
There are so many people who have said stuff that I think we would all agree, or I think even some Zionists would agree, if they were honest, are a lot more problematic than what you posted on Instagram. So here's this one professor, Amy Wax, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, who said during the interview, I don't think I've ever seen a Black student graduate in the top quarter of the class, and rarely in the top half. She also said our country will be better off with more whites and fewer non-whites. So speech like that is protected, but saying that Zionism is racist is basically the suggestion is that it's anti-Semitic. And so I guess people would say someone like you is a self-loathing Jew, or, you know, whatever. I mean, I get called Capo Katie. People love that. That's great. I mean, just to give you people a sense of how odious some of these people are, I literally, because I'm working on a documentary about Holocaust survivors speaking out against the genocide, who are, like you pointed out, like you made this point, never again is never again for anyone. And I released a short of this woman, Marion Ingram, who's been protesting outside of the White House for over a year now. And I released this video, and someone in the comments literally called her because she said that October 7th, she didn't see October 7th. She did not consider that a Holocaust. She knows that Israel calls it that. And to her, she sees the what's happening to Palestinians resembles the Holocaust in her opinion. And a person in the comments like called her a capo. It's like one thing to call me a capo, but you're actually this young person who was not even born, she's older than me, but was not born during the Holocaust, is actually going to call an actual like Holocaust survivor a capo. I mean, just these are the same people who claim to really respect survivors and be motivated by the lessons of the Holocaust. But of course, as we know, for some people and way too many people, never again really means never again for Jews.
There's so many things that could be said about that story, and it breaks my heart. And I had to, in the fall, I had to look up capo. I hadn't actually been called that before, and now it's like, my
regular
number one internet slur. But I think, over the past few decades, I mean, over probably more than 100 years, but specifically over the past few decades with the war on terror and the way in which our media landscape, whether it be corporate news media or whether it be movies, TV shows, the sort of circulation and recirculation of the Arab as terrorist, as the way in which we've totally normalized Islamophobia in this country. We've so dehumanized Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims that we can be watching a live stream genocide and our, leaders, whether they be our political leaders, our, university leaders, et cetera, have so dehumanized these communities that it's, easy to open up the news today and see an article. I think CNN was talking about how, Israeli soldiers are, dealing with the trauma of having, genocided Palestinians, and we have to worry about their mental health. But when you have a community, you have a population that's been so dehumanized, then for someone like me or someone like a Holocaust survivor to speak out on behalf of humanity is seen as a complete betrayal of this project, in which what we're seeing with Zionism is that, some Jews have been brought into the white supremacist project, which on college and university campuses is an anti-equity project. And so the same figures like Christopher Rufo, who are trying to get rid of critical race theory, who are going after gender and sexuality studies departments, who are attacking DEI, they're now also the champions of the Jews. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But this is a very strange partnership.
Or like people like John Hagee, right? So at the Zionism, at the Israel United for Israel thing, you had Schumer, you had Hakeem Jeffries, and then you had Pastor John Hagee, who says that Hitler was sent by God to get the Jews back to the Holy Land where we can convert or be killed.